Happy anniversary to the church. Yeah. How many years is it? Do we know?
34.
34? Happy 34th.
34th.
Yeah, so today we're going to look at another interaction with Jesus and some of his followers, Thomas included, that happened after the resurrection but before the ascension, before Jesus went back up to heaven. And they're in this time of almost crisis of faith, it seems, to really begin to do what Jesus had told them to do. I want you to think about things in life that are familiar. Things that are familiar to you. Whatever your life is, whatever your routine is, whatever your background is, we all have things that are familiar, right? And how we often find comfort in those things. So think with me of the comfort that we can find in things that we know, things that are familiar. Right? When we first got to Indonesia, we were going through culture shock, and we're trying to adjust, and we just want some quiet. Right? Because if you know Indonesia, there's noise all the time. Right? There's people walking around the streets, yelling out stuff they're selling. You honk at people differently there, so you honk to communicate in cars or motorcycles to go or to stop, or to you have the right of way. I mean, you communicate through, there's noise all the time. Right? Even at nighttime, if you live in the kampung sometimes, the people, young people are playing their guitar outside, right? They're singing, and we just need some quiet because we're American. We just talk loud, but besides that, we like peace and quiet. And we went to the mall one time and we saw Starbucks. Right, Starbucks. Before I knew what coffee should be like, I loved Starbucks. Sorry. But it was a place that was familiar. Right? There's Starbucks all around the world, and we went into Starbucks, and as soon as we ordered our drinks, right, at that time, I was always a cappuccino, but Patty was a vanilla latte at that time. And we ordered that, and we sat down on the big cushy chairs, right, that made it feel like home. And we closed our eyes for a second. We felt like we were back in America. And it was the moment of comfort and refreshment that we needed to say, right? We even went to the baristas. I don't know what you'd call them in Indonesian, but baristas, right? and we said, this looks just like Starbucks in our country. What do you do? And he said, oh, we have to import stuff. We only have two choices. We either have to pay to get it imported, or we have to make identical furniture and decorations as it would be back in the US. And our store, we decided to import furniture from the US, so it feels like Starbucks back home. And we said, oh, it does. Thank you so much. And so we find comfort, don't we, in things that are familiar. Now, one thing that Patty's mom always gets at Christmas time, she gets a package from Cracker Barrel. Do you know Cracker Barrel? There's not really many Cracker Barrels in the West, I don't believe. But they're all over in the Midwest, right, and in the East. And I've heard so much about it that when we would travel to speak, if we saw a Cracker Barrel, we'd say, oh, let's stop at Cracker Barrel. I mean, it seems like the mecca of food for non-Californians, doesn't it? Those who are from the East, right? And we've heard so much about it, and the package she gets is great. It's a breakfast thing, so it's pancakes and sausage or bacon. It's this thing, and she makes it for Christmas, and it's the best breakfast that we have. So we went into Cracker Barrel, and we're looking at the menu. And nothing looks good to us. It just looks heavy. Now it's meat and potatoes, and more potatoes, right? And butter, and meat. I mean, that's how it looks, and a little bit of greens, right? And it's just, and you could have fried this meat or grilled meat this, or your potatoes like this with butter and honey and a side of bread. You know, we're looking at it, I'm like, yeah, sweet potatoes, right? And that's it. I'm thinking, where's the salad? Right? Where's the Chinese chicken salad? I need that. I need something lighter. We're on the road. We're eating out all the time. I'm feeling extra heavy, and I just want something light. And I'm looking through the whole menu, and even the side orders. You know what the sides are like? Corn and grits. Right? And I just sense it like sitting in my stomach for 8 hours of driving from New Mexico to California, just thinking, I don't want Cracker Barrel. I want something else, anything else. And we're driving back and we're laughing about, I did eat something and we just split it because it just seems so much. And I talked to my parents a couple of days later. My dad traveled a lot. He knows Cracker Barrel. And I said, hey, we finally ate at Cracker Barrel, but I didn't find anything I liked. He said, what? You didn't find any comfort food? Right? And I didn't understand that phrase. I said, what do you mean comfort food? You know, comfort food, the food that makes you feel at home, right? The food that you just sit back and all these memories come back, and I thought, those are not my memories. Right? My comfort food is like fish tacos. Right? Carne asada. Can I get an amen? I mean, that's comfort food. Some rice and veggies, right? That's comfort food. I mean, for me, Cracker Barrel is not comfort food, but it's because it's not where I came from, right? But so really, this concept of comfort, it's unique for all of us. And it's different for all of us because there's experiences and upbringings and backgrounds that we all have that are unique, but things that we look to say, I feel so good here. Right? This is familiar for me. This is comfortable for me. And what we'll see in the passage we'll read in just a few minutes is that after Jesus had resurrected, after he had appeared to people, his third appearance was to 7 of the disciples after they went back to what was familiar. Right? The most of them, not all, but a lot of them were fishermen. And we see this moment in the process of these number of days that Jesus was with them after the resurrection. And they say, well, what do you want to do? You know, what should we do? And Peter's like, I'm going to go fishing. Typical guy, right? I'm going to go back. I'm going to go fishing. Not just because it's fishing, but it's because it's what they know. Right? It's what they do. It's what they came from. And this group of 6 other disciples, we know some, we don't know a couple of them, said, well, let's go with you. Right? But the resurrection had happened. I mean, think with me, if you were one of the 12, now 11, who had walked with Jesus through thick and thin, seen miracles happen, seen Lazarus raised from the dead, seen all of the things that we've been spending months looking at up to this point, and then he dies on the cross and you're devastated, wondering, could he really be the Messiah? All my hopes are dashed, and 3 days later, he's gone. Now, wouldn't that be the most exciting news that you could ever have experienced? And we should still feel that way now. But even these disciples, a number of days after he began to appear to them, just left that and went back to what they knew. And went back to the familiar. Went back to what was easy. They weren't knocking on doors, pounding on doors, saying, Jesus is risen, Jesus is risen. Right? If you remember back at the announcement of Jesus' birth, the shepherds went everywhere on their way back from seeing Jesus, telling people they didn't even know the Messiah is here, right? The Savior is here. That child who's destined to come, he's here. And these shepherds did this, but these disciples who had years with Jesus, seeing miracle after miracle, teaching after teaching, his faith holding him to the cross because of our need for forgiveness of sin, went back to what was familiar. So we're going to read out of John chapter 21 today. Now I want you to think back to this tension that we could potentially have between the familiar in our lives and the need to walk by faith. It says this, starting in John 21, verse 1. It says this, afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, there he is again, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and then 2 other disciples were together, 7 of them total. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter said. And then they told him, we'll go with you. So they went out and they got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples didn't realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. Then he told them, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of such the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say that, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped in the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, maybe 100 yards away. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. So I want you to think with me about what the disciples did, and not just what they did, but why they did it. Because I think what we do, how we live life, is so often exactly like how they were living their lives. Right? They had seen Christ risen from the dead. They had put their fingers in the holes from the nails, from the spear. I mean, they had seen the resurrected Christ, and still, at some moment, said, let's go back and go fishing. And some commentators will even say that there's tension in understanding what Peter even meant of how much was it, I'm bored, let's go fish, and how much it was, I'm going to leave this life of faith, of serving Christ, and go back to the life that I know. Because wouldn't we admit that that would be a whole lot easier? It wouldn't be a lot easier. So think with me about this. What are the times in life that require the most faith? What are the times in life that you have had that have required faith? And we would probably say they're some of the most difficult times, wouldn't we? They're some of the most difficult, potentially stressful, unknown times of our life, but they require faith. Would you agree with me on that? But when we step into those moments for the right reason, with the right heart, with the right intention, isn't it amazing how God works? Whatever the result is, the process of growing our faith is amazing. But it's probably not natural, because we tend to always go to comfort. Don't we? Not just because it's comfortable, not just because of the good memories, but because it's easy as well. It's things that we know, right? We're familiar with it. It doesn't take much thinking. A lot of times things are even automatic. Right? Have you had the experience where you can drive home, but you don't know all the streets it takes to get home? You just know how to get there. And somebody says, tell me which streets to take. And you say, I don't know all the streets. But here you turn left, and then I go down a few blocks. I don't know, but this is the address. Right? Because it's so automatic. And that's how life is. And that's how we often like to function, because it's easiest. It's comforting. It's familiar. But the other thing we have to realize, oftentimes, the scary thing, the potential thing that could hinder our growth, is that it rarely takes faith to do what's familiar. And oftentimes when we step into the unfamiliar, the things that are difficult, the things that we don't know what's going to happen, we're on our knees so much more because of the faith that it requires. But why would it even matter? And think with me, why would it matter to be so intentional to live lives of faith? And we could probably agree that that's how we're going to grow, right? If our belief system, our faith in Jesus is based on just that, is based on faith, then we have to grow in faith. Oftentimes you hear analogies of faith. It's like a muscle, right? If you use it or you work it, it will grow. If you don't, it will die, it will shrink, right? That there's all of these illustrations for faith about our personal growth, which is absolutely true. But the other thing that we have to realize that Scripture says is that faith pleases God. I mean, it makes God happy when we walk by faith. Look at Hebrews 11:6. Word for word, it says this: without faith, it is impossible to please God. So if you just would turn that around, the way we please God is how? Through faith, right? By walking in faith. And I sort of get the feeling as a dad of those moments where, where Stevie or Mia have made those milestones in life where they have begun to walk. With Stevie, he never walked, he ran. Right? Or riding a bike, and you just sort of, there's the potential to fall, right? There's the potential to get hurt, and sometimes you're a little more cautious than other times, and you sort of, whoa, but to just say go, and to see them do it, right? It is so exciting. And I think a lot of times God is like that, saying, just take the risk, right? Just take the step, just go, just come on. I'm right there. I'll catch you if you fall. You might get a couple of bumps and bruises, but what's going to happen in your heart is going to be so much better than what would happen outwardly from your cuts and bruises. And me, as your God, as your Heavenly Father, I'm going to be so excited that you would trust me to do that. It's going to make me so pleased with you and your decisions to take those steps of faith. When Stevie began to work on losing the training wheels, right? That's a big step. for kids. Because you rely on those training wheels. And you know what, I never thought of it. In Indonesia, I thought they were brilliant. What they did, at least the people we knew, is they would take off one training wheel. Right, have you ever heard of that? I've never thought about that. But they take one off, so that leaning one way, at least you felt safe. Right, and then so it was like a step to losing the training wheels. And I thought that was brilliant, because we never did that. I mean, when it was training wheel time to take it out, we just took them off, right? That's what we do as America. I don't know what, go! Right? You know, you're like, boom, right? And that's it. It's like you don't have the one safety wheel to hold you. And it wasn't like Stevie tried the first time, and of course me being like American dad, I'm just take them off. And I'll hold the wheel and I'll run with him and I'll just let him go. Right? And then I let him go and boom! Oh man, I'm just not a good dad, right? And it just wasn't working. And so we put the training wheels back on because we didn't want him to feel bad about biking. Let's just wait. Maybe it's not time yet. And he kept seeing all of his friends, you know, with no training wheels on. He's like, Dad, take my training wheels off. Like, okay. And so he came up with this plan because where we lived at that time, it was a house designed to be like okay if it flooded in Surabaya, which was often. So our house was high and the driveway had almost a ramp down into the street. So he sat at the top of that ramp on his bike with no training wheels and he just pushed off. Right, but because there was enough momentum from going down, it gave him enough speed to like get his feet on right and get situated with enough force to be balanced, and then he just pedaled around the whole block. Like, didn't fall, nothing. That was the first ride after we took the training wheels off for the second time. Right, and then just imagine how I felt. That's my boy. Right? You didn't need me? Right? I mean, it pleased me so much to see that even the falls from before didn't stop him from saying, I want him off. I'll figure this, I'm gonna go. Right? It was about him taking that step, but it was also what happened to his father by taking those risks and step of it brings God so much pleasure to see us walking by faith. And if God is truly a loving God, I mean, think with me how excited he would be to just see us take those steps. But I wonder if you're like me, that it is sometimes way too easy to go back to the familiar. And even if I don't go there for comfort, maybe I go there because it's easier. Maybe I go there because that's my routine. That's what I need to do. And even in my routine, which is comfortable, I know how to key in those programs. I know how to talk to these people. I know how to code all of these things, right? I don't use faith to do those things. Do you? I mean, do you wake up in the morning and you say, God, thank you so much I'm breathing. This is amazing. We're in autopilot almost the whole day, aren't we? We just wake up, we get ready, we get everyone else ready, we eat whatever we eat, or we drink coffee, and we're just in autopilot the whole day. We could literally go through our entire day without using any faith, couldn't we? And we get to the end of the day, and we say, oh, no, I shall read my Bible. Right? Oh, I haven't prayed today, I shall pray. Right, but I wonder if it pleases God so much more if we woke up and we said, how could I be intentional to take steps of faith today? How could I not be in the familiar and forget that I'm supposed to walk by faith and not by sight, which is what Paul tells us. I think why it matters so much to God to not always go back to the familiar, or if we go to the familiar, to make sure that faith is always a priority over the familiar, is that it pleases him so much because he knows what it's going to do in our lives. And when we got ready to go to Indonesia, I mean, some of you saw from the mission trip that we took here, it takes a lot of planning, right? It takes a lot of process. It takes a lot of funding. It takes a lot of prayer. I mean, you can't just decide one day, I'm going to move my family to Indonesia and we're going to live there for 10 years. And it took time. It took us 2 years, right, of training. We traveled around to all these churches. But I remember the moment where we sort of got accepted. We were official in terms of being sent to Indonesia. Now you got to raise all the money, you got to do all the trainings, you got to go around, speak everywhere, do all of these things. And they gave us this paper. This paper was all of the financial stuff that we needed. Here's what you need monthly, and here's the breakdown. It's like every month? You know, it was a big number. Then I times it by 12, and I thought, this is crazy. I don't need this. No, you need that. No, I don't. I don't need that much. That's not your salary, Steve. That's what you need for all of the things that are related to you going, that you are required to raise. Like, but I don't want that much. Well, you don't need to do all of this, but if you're going to go with us, you have to have all of this. And then somebody said, Steve, we were in this little group. How much do you got? And I told him the number. Oh, that's nothing. Look at mine. What? And then the person who was sort of our mentor said, well, living in Japan is a lot more expensive than living in Indonesia. Oh. Okay then, no more arguments for me. But it was this huge amount, even like a car. I remember they said $20,000 for a car. Yes, thank you. That's what I said. What? I don't need that type of car. Like, what am I do? Roll up in my Lexus? You know, like, do you want to know Jesus? You get a Lexus too. It wasn't like that. And I said, I don't feel, comfortable with myself raising $20,000 for a car. And they said, well, all we know is that the people in Indonesia, that's what they tell us. So we go with whatever they say. So I even emailed them. Those of you who went on the mission trip, Kevin was our leader. And I said, Mr. Humble, because I wasn't really friends with him yet, Mr. Humble, $20,000 for a car just seems excessive. And he wrote back and he said, Steve, if you want to lower it, you can, but I just want you to know we want you to start out with a new car because we want it to last. And cars in Indonesia are more expensive than cars in the US because most of them are imported. And we usually get one of two cars because we're driving people all around. So this is really probably about the price you're going to have to expect. Man, this is crazy. Right? And when we did get there, we didn't quite spend that much, but it was almost that much. And we got the base model. We got the lowest model. Right? And those of you who know Indonesia know you can bargain for things, right? When you want to buy stuff. And I'm not great at bargaining, but I thought a car that's almost $20,000, I got some bargaining power. Right? And so I went into the showroom and they had just one sample of a car, then you pick out the color for the interior, the exterior, all this stuff. And then we sat down at the table with the salesperson and a guy from our team, and I said, so, how about you give it to me for this? And everybody was just shocked. They're just looking at me. And I said, or you can give it to me for this. Right? And I'm just going, and everybody's quiet. And the guy on our team pulls me aside. He's like, Steve, what are you doing? I said, I'm bargaining. Don't you bargain in Indonesia? Well, yeah, but you don't bargain for cars. What do you mean you don't bargain for cars? That's ridiculous. In America, we bargain for cars. Yeah, but Steve, cars are no to bargain for. Just be quiet. What do you mean? This is like almost $20,000. I can at least get a couple thousand off, right? Steve, I'm serious. Be quiet. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Right? And I just shut up. But that was our process. I mean, you can just imagine. It wasn't just the money. You land there. You have no support system. You're like, God, I don't even know how to say anything. I don't know how to say anything. We're driving to our house to be dropped off all by ourselves with no team members, no white people, if you want to call it that, which I was told I was white this week. I had forgotten that. But thank you for reminding me. But, nobody around that was familiar to me. And driving there, I said, tell me things I need to know. Tell me things I need to know. And he saw where we went to our house, and he said, okay, turn in here to the right. And he told me how to say that, because that's what you need. That's where your house is. Tell the taxis to turn into the right. Okay, what else? What else? Where's the bathroom? Tell me that one. And then we're like, what else? What else? Well, and I'd been really sick. So they said, okay, if somebody's cooking for you, tell them, don't make it spicy. And Patty and I looked at each other, we're like, we like spicy. But just say it for now. And we said, okay, Pastor gets sick when it's spicy. And that was it. And we had this little list, and that's all we said. And so you could imagine what it's like living there with a little baby, not knowing any language, not having a vehicle, having all of this money to raise, being in a spiritually darker or oppressive place that you feel more clearly, and saying, I want to tell these people about Jesus, but I don't even know how to ask where the kitchen is. And you are on your knees all the time praying, God, would you help me? God, please do this. God, show me this. God, open this door. God, reveal this. God, could you imagine how much you're praying? Right? Could you imagine some of the team members who went to Indonesia, or their parents, or their spouses, knowing we're going over to Indonesia and going through this process of saying, oh God, help us raise the money. Oh God, protect them over there. Oh God, do this. Oh God, do this. Or those of you who didn't go, or who were not as connected to the team going, probably barely prayed. right? Not that that's a bad thing, but when you get into the familiar, oftentimes we don't need faith, but when you move into the unfamiliar, which is really what we're supposed to do, right, as followers of Christ, it takes a lot of faith, and that produces these prayers and these crying outs and these longings to say, God, would you just help me? Would you just do this? And you're crying out, you're walking into the unknown, and then the amazing thing happens is that our faith grows, but also God begins to answer in better ways than we could even do on our own. Where we've been in Indonesia for 10 years, and our finances were strong. Our prayer team was strong. I felt pretty comfortable with the language. I felt pretty confident with the culture. I was still learning, but it felt like home. You know what began to happen? I prayed a little less, and a little less, and a little less about all of those things because it was familiar. But to walk into Starbucks felt foreign. But to sit in a little warung on the edge of the street to get some nasi goreng, right? That was home. And that was so familiar that it took less and less faith. Even though we were there to serve God, even though we were there to try to tell people about Jesus, what we realized is that because it had become so familiar, we had to be so much more intentional about trying to take steps of faith in the day-to-day because it had become what we were used to. Just like the fishermen said, what are we going to do now? We don't know. Let's go back to what we know. Because it's so easy to step into that. And after 10 years, we felt like God was beginning to say, it's time to come back home. Right? Come back to the U.S. And it was scary because y'all are crazy here. Right? You don't talk with using the horn. Right? You use the horn in anger here. Right? I mean, I got home and I started doing like the polite beeps, right? Because you were like, in Indonesia, you can beep politely. Like, beep, beep. You know, it's like, go ahead. That's it. I mean, it's nice. You know, it's like, beep, beep, I'm here, don't hit me. You know, that's like a good way to communicate in Indonesia. And I'd be driving and I'd be like, beep, beep, you know? And then this guy looked at me like, and he did stuff that I don't want to show you here, because especially where I'm camera now. So I mean, he had all these tattoos, and he's driving by, and Patty's like, honey, stop. And I said, well, he's drifting. I just want him to know I'm here. But honey, we're in America. I was like, oh, yeah, you know. So when I drove by, I smiled at him, right, and I waved. And it's just like, well, stop, you're making it worse. I just want to be friendly, you know. Oh, this is crazy living in America. What happened? Because the more that I was over there, even though I am the white guy, right, the inside had left the white world, right, and it was more home. It was more normal. It was more natural how things functioned in Indonesia. But at the same time, they took a whole lot less faith. And so coming back here and saying, I don't know how to drive like an American anymore, right? I don't know how to shop like an American anymore. Sometimes, I mean, even to this day, people will say, where are you from? And I'll be like, California. But you have this accent. What are you talking about? Yeah, you have this accent, how you talk. Where were you born? California. You know, like, where were you raised? California. What is it about you? I said, well, I lived in Indonesia for 10 years. Ah, that's it. Because you don't talk like a Californian. Right, I said, okay. You know, and then we had this guy come over to work on a video for us in Indonesia. And he was from California. And when I went to get him, he's like, Steve. He's giving me like this high five thing. No, I knew what to do. Like, I just went with it. And when I walked up, he's like, Steve, you're from California, right? I said, yeah. How did you know? He's like, because of the walk. What do you mean the walk? He's like, in California, we have a walk. I said, show me the walk. You know, he's like, right? And then, do you know the walk? Those not California, we have a walk. In case you didn't know that. And it was, he was so excited. He's like, Steve, do the walk. You know, and I'm like, okay, let me do the walk. You know? And we're just like, we're watching, let's walk down the street together. You know, we're sort of like enjoying that he's from California. I'd say stuff about California. He'd be like, oh yeah. And then he'd tell me stuff like that. Yes. And it was so fun. It was so comforting because it was familiar. And when we came back to the U.S., we were like, God, we don't know what we're going to do. We don't even feel like we fit in anymore. That our familiar was now over there and not here. And it brought me to a whole new realm of faith in life. coming back to a place I thought was home. But because it was not familiar anymore at all to me, it required so much faith. And I want you to think about your life and how much we get an autopilot because things are familiar, and how little it really requires faith. Because this scene actually is just a reflection. It's almost like identical to Luke 5, which is when Jesus first called the disciples. Right? If you remember, they were out fishing. They saw Jesus. There was a miraculous catch of fish. Right? He said, drop your nets on the other side. And they did. That's what we saw right here. The place they were at was the Sea of Galilee then in Luke 5 and now in John 21. Same exact place. Not all of the disciples are fishermen, right? Matthew's a tax collector. We see 7 of our disciples going back to fishing. Very identical to what they were doing in the very beginning. And this is the moment where Jesus says to them, follow me, I'll make you fishers of people. They dropped their nets. They dropped everything they knew. They dropped their job. They left their families. They left everything that was familiar. And they followed him. They stepped into a life of faith, and the amazing happened, right? That's what we've been doing for the past number of months, looking at Jesus' life from his birth to his death and resurrection, and almost now to his ascension. That these 12, and then the outer ring of followers as well, were called into this incredible life of watching Jesus work. But it only happened because they left what was familiar, and they stepped into what was unknown. And they stepped into the realm of faith. So think with me about how a life that's familiar can actually hinder faith growing. We see in 2 Corinthians 4:18, Paul says this. He says that we live by faith and not by sight. That's who we are. Sorry, in 5 verse 7. And then in 4:18 it says this. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Because what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And as we close today, I want you to think about how much God would be pleased if we just all went out every day, woke up every day saying, you've been given this gift of life for a reason to go change the world, and we did it. We took advantage. It doesn't mean we're going to be perfect. It doesn't mean we have to be as good an evangelist as Billy Graham. It doesn't mean we have to see all of these happen like other people, but for you, in the things you do, in the places you go, in the people you meet, in the routines you have, how could faith drive you instead of going into the familiar and just going into autopilot? And you know your routine better than I do. Right? But think of me, all of the things that we are called to do as followers of Christ. And one of them that we always talk about, and we try to encourage each other to tell people about Jesus. Because I don't care how long you've walked with Jesus, that takes faith, doesn't it? And sometimes it's downright hard to talk to people about Jesus. But once we open our mouths, it's the most exciting thing that could happen when we go out and we share the good news with people who don't know it. Hey, that's one thing we can always come back to as a community. That's what we're called to do. That's what we desire to do. That's not just about us growing, not just about other people hearing about Christ, but even about pleasing God because we are walking by faith. And he promises to do things even greater that we can do on our own as we do that. So as we close, I want you to consider taking almost a next step in feeling not equipped. Because as soon as we feel equipped, it becomes familiar, right? But feeling driven, feeling committed to talk to people about Jesus every week. And sometimes the struggle is we just don't know where to start, right? We don't know how to do that. We don't know what we're supposed to say. So if that's you, and you want some guidance, you want to talk more about it, and to be a part of a group that would say, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm going to wake up every day, I'm going to be praying that I can go out and live by faith and not by sight, not just be in my routine and autopilot. And I want to walk by faith, especially in the realm of telling people about Jesus, but you just don't feel as equipped. On the prayer card, I want you to write, talking to people about Jesus, evangelism, whatever, however you want to word it, so that I'll know we're going to start a conversation together to try to help you feel more equipped and more ready to talk to people about Jesus. Does that make sense? So let that be one of the application points today, as well as just reflecting on our lives and the familiar and how often it takes little faith to do that, and how much God would be pleased